But what a challenge is it actually in your view? Because we are already finding huge gaps in climate finance. We already have incredible financing gaps in development finance. And when you compound them, is that a double hazard in any way? Does that make it a bigger challenge?
Right, thank you so much. Excellency, all distinguished panelists, as an African, I should say as well, all protocols observed, just in case I missed someone. And perhaps next time we can invest in a bigger microphone than the one that we have here, because I can hear more from our neighbor than here. But that we can be on the works. We can lend some technical expertise on that, especially for my village. I have lots of microphones here. All right, so gaps and gaps and gaps. So I think we settled the issue of gaps by knowing how big the gaps are. Many reports confirming each other's at the global level. They are estimates and close to being guesstimates as well, because we are not really aware of the accuracy of some of the information, especially in the adaptation front. Mitigation, we know more or less about what's needed. But if you can really see the figures floating around about the gaps when it comes to adaptation, it's between 130 billion to 350 billion. But the mitigation has taken some priority simply because the whole agenda of the climate action has been hijacked in the very beginning of drafting it by some advanced economies, not just their governments, but by their leaders, including from the civil society. Little attention has been given to development or the global south. And what we started to see, and thanks with my natural bias that needs to be discounted, to Sharm el-Sheikh last year, when that false dichotomy between climate and development has been resolved. Climate action is development action, climate finance is development finance. If we are not doing that, we are ignoring facts and evidence. If we are not doing the proper thing, we are going to be misleading decision makers, private sector participants. If you are doing well in energy, you are doing well in SDG 7. If the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda is under active implementation, it's about water management, SDG 6. It's about food systems, SDG 2. It's about resilient infrastructure and cities, SDG 11. So here, this kind of split of work, one can tell you something why this happened. First, because of the hijacking of the climate action agenda from the very beginning, though that the Paris Agreement itself was balanced and came after the announcement of the SDGs in September 2015. But when it comes to action, and those who may have bureaucratic interest just to talk about climate, ignoring development, now they realized the mistake. They didn't achieve much in climate, and they sacrificed a lot in the road to achieve the SDGs. Now, common sense is prevailing, at least in COP27 and COP28 today, as demonstrated as well in this session. A few years back, this could be an act of heresy if you are considering SDGs as part of that. Climate action is SDG 13 as well. When it comes to the gaps at the global level, we can spend hours explaining that, but I can refer you to the two reports. One of them is sponsored by Egypt and the UK, and now by Egypt and UAE. Vera Songwe's report with Nick Stern about identifying of gaps, telling us that we need to bridge $2.4 trillion of gaps. 1.4 trillion should come from domestic resource mobilization. The additional effort should be no less than $1.4 trillion from developing economies and emerging markets, including China. Good luck with that, especially that many countries of the low-income countries and low-middle-income countries are already suffering from fiscal constraints, and in many countries, their debt service is eating up essential services like education, health, let alone what we should really be doing in climate action. In the rest of the world, it should be mobilizing more funding. It's requiring from the likes of my former employer and my good friend's current employer, activity of no less than 3 times of what they do. of no less than $350 billion of funding in order to leverage the private sector and go where the private sector cannot go alone. And then the private sector itself needs really to increase its financing, hopefully by private equity participation, not by borrowing, because we have more than enough of borrowing in the system today. So this is an issue that needs to be dealt with through leveraging the private sector from current levels of 80 billion, 100 billion to more than 400 or 480 billion. These are all based on the study that have been confirmed by another report submitted to the G20 and is going to be presented today. My concern is completely different. Let's do the right thing at the local level, as mentioned by the Honorable Minister, and given that we have a regional leader in the presence of my good friend, Dr. Dardari, we need really to take those levels more seriously than before, because the harm starts at local level and the benefit will end at the local level. Emissions are not coming from the global scene without a source at a local level. It's coming from some local activities that need to cut their emissions. Adaptation should come through projects at the local level, and that had been very much missing. And it was done through some sort of a generous act of understanding that if you are dealing with the capitals properly, that will trickle down and cascade. That doesn't happen. We need really to have a bottom-up approach. We need to have a localized approach. Actually, in the report that we did with the Ministry of Planning, the first of a kind that I was mentioning 2 days ago, with the Ministry of Planning and the Arab League, it was basically about the benefits of abandoning some sort of misleading discussions about centralization and decentralization. I always tease my good friend Dr. Khalid when I say that. But now he is a leader on the localization work. The localization is more relevant and more impactful. And then we need really to do better when it comes to de-risking the private sector. For the private sector, and I will end with that, because there are lots of talks, especially today, about the private sector, and the talk becomes more even interesting and exciting in the absence of private sector representatives. But what we can really do is checking the requirements of the private sector to do business. If we are keen really to get them into the scene. There is the list that was developed by Mark Carney, my good friend. But I told him this is a perfect list that could be an enemy of the good, because he's asking for the following: macroeconomic stability, exchange rate alignment, deep financial sector, rule of law, governance, and then a pipeline of bankable and investable projects. Well, I tell him, well, in this case, you would assume that countries of the global south will be net lenders and providing technical assistance to the France of the world or advanced OECD countries. The practical way that we have been very active in at the regional and local level, I told him, in my experience in many countries today, that you can reform as you go. A good example in Benban in Egypt, great public-private partnership. And through the establishment of Benban, there were many reforms. Offtake agreements were reformed. Tariffs were reformed. Business environment were reformed. More of public-private partnerships. It was not just about funding. It's basically about reforming the business environment. And here you can reform as you go and encourage the governments to do these hard measures, because they know that there will be ultimate benefits to the general public. So as somebody was saying, well, we shouldn't be expecting red carpets for investors, but you need to give them dignified reception. But at the same time, they need to take the risk, and hopefully in a good day, they can really be leveraged as well with the likes of the World Bank, and supported technically with the UNDP and many philanthropies as well for providing capacity development. Pipeline of bankable investable projects. If you see somebody saying that developing economies do not have it, tell them, no, you are wrong. There is a list now that we put in a report called From Assets to Flows, 420 answers to that you are wrong if you are assuming that there is no pipeline. And the assets are there, as mentioned by Dr. Dardari. So where the demand needs to meet the supply of assets and the projects is going to be about catalytic support, capacity development, some environment or reform that could be required. We did something similar but bigger, again with partnership with the Egyptian government, coordinated with the Ministry of Planning under the auspices of the Egyptian president on green smart projects. We didn't have just 400 projects, we had 12,000 projects from small enterprises, the medium one that Dr. Daddari likes, and I like them as well. But we have micro enterprises, startups, women-led projects, mega projects. So here and civil society have been involved as well. So this is basically a kind of a practical answer to fill the gaps. There are two lines of business. Either you can write reports about gaps, and there is a great deal of business in there, but there is heavy competition for that. Or you go into the road of closing the gaps by providing ideas and actions for implementation, and many of them are working today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So much to unpack. So much to unpack.